Whoa! Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Jeremy Corbyn suspended from the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has gone right for the jugular on Jeremy, on old JC. Jizzy Crizzy himself, over this anti-Semitism thing. Keir Starmer has picked the moneyed interest over all the new voters that JC brought in, over all those youth college voters that were coming in, university grads, university students, all the people in NHS, everyone. He's gone with the moneyed interest instead. Unbelievable. And now, Jeremy Corbyn has come into the light. Now he understands. Now they've turned on him. Now he says, well, the problems could have been overstated. The racism in the Labour Party could have been overstated. What's going on is a bit politically motivated, I think. Really, Jeremy? Really? Is that what you think? Is this the first time you've ever had that thought? Are you perhaps projecting, maybe? Maybe you see what you do, and then you notice something and you prescribe it to somebody else? I'll be honest with you. I love to talk about politics privately. Publicly, I know better than that. But in all honesty, I actually liked him. I did. I kind of liked the guy. And I'll tell you why. I liked him because when he was wrong, he was honestly wrong. And I don't mean that he was honest about being wrong. I mean, when he was wrong, it was because he believed it. He wasn't lying. Whatever he was wrong about, he honestly believed, and he perpetuated his error from there. Keir Starmer, this lawyer that they've got in now as the leader of the Labour Party, I mean, he knows better. That is a shrewd guy. I would not underestimate Keir Starmer for a minute. Not for a minute. That guy genuinely is a threat. But more on him later. When the normal political classes, which Jeremy Corbyn never prescribed to be, like he never said he was your average backbencher. Like we all knew that he was a bit of a different breed, maybe a throwback to something romantically ideological. But we never imagined he would be. But we know better. And the truth is that the Labour Party and most of the politicians, to be honest, when they're wrong, it's because they are knowingly wrong and they are lying. Alright? Because there's an advantage in it. There is a tangible advantage in not always telling the truth. And you can see this because they'll lie about the truth to make it fit. Alright? And they know that there's a difference between what they're saying and what they're seeing. They're not stupid, but they're also not ideologically blinded. They're looking for personal advantage, which is a great equalizer. It allows them to see quite clearly what actually they need to do to get ahead. But it couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. But on the other hand, I wish it hadn't happened to him because he wasn't intentionally bad. He was never intentionally wrong. He never lied. As far as I can tell, every misstep he took and every error that I perceived in his belief structure or his ideology was one born from some genuine mistake. Like a genuine internal miscalculation that he never resolved and just continued on with. We know that the Labour Party as it is now, and a lot of other political entities, they're about that personal advantage. And they know where the moneyed interest is. And to be honest, the votes don't really matter that much to them. So the fact that they've just sacrificed all these similarly romantic and ideological voters, like JC was, for the sake of cozying up to another establishment, essentially. It's kind of tragic. And it's tragic because without the voters, you then have this shell of a party that just stands on ideological grounds, really. Like, it uses the ideology rather than inhabiting it. It's just going to display it instead, which no one's going to buy, only the most deluded. And so they're going to lose their support. And then what are we going to have? We're going to have... I mean, sure, I'm a conservative, but I'm a conservative because right now that seems like the best option. I'm not married to the idea of being a conservative by any means. But from their ideology, from what they preach, and from what they seem to deliver, on the whole, yeah, I would side more with them than the other available options. But what we'll have is we'll have a Tory party that essentially runs unopposed. And that is the real tragedy of this whole debacle. This calamity is going to allow Tories to run unopposed, essentially. And that is going to attract an even worse breed of politician. Someone who would only move into a field because they knew that they would be absolutely held unaccountable. And with that amount of leverage and authority, that is incredibly dangerous. I'm happy to support a party, but at the same time, when that party is wrong, when any entity is wrong that I support, I want there to be a ready pool of individuals or agents that are able to hold them to account. And if I see something wrong, I want to know that I'm going to be backed up. I can go on my own. I'm happy to do it. I would rather I didn't have to. I would rather my sentiment was shared than more than just me, because then maybe, a mass delusion is a little bit less likely than just me being deluded on my own. My own little insanity. So this is the real problem, is because Labour Party is now essentially going to fall apart. It's just going to rest on the champagne socialists of the 80s. That's what we're going to have. Those who actually got a bit into power, saw how good the good life was, never went back. Never went back. Those are the people who are going to just stick with this because it's still a bit of a cash cow for them. They can still get a meal ticket off it. This is really problematic. Without a good opposition, more than just a popular one, which at least, JC brought popularity to the opposition, for sure he did. Alright, without a good opposition, the Tories are going to be able to ride roughshod over everything. And I don't want that. I want a Conservative Party, while in power, while they are in power, and I do support them, I want them to be held accountable for the mistakes they make by someone capable of doing it. I don't doubt Keir Starmer is a capable individual. I absolutely call into question his motivation and his ambition. I have no idea where Keir Starmer is going with all this, but he is a very bright guy, and from what little I've read about him, he's quite a determined individual when it comes to himself. He may be ideological on some grounds. Is that self-serving ideology, or is it a true nostalgic, romantic ideology that he has a utopian view that he's dedicated to? I honestly can't tell you, but I definitely don't believe it's anywhere near the extent that Jeremy Corbyn had. Without a reasonably powerful, popular, sensible, and somewhat ideological opposition to the government is not going to be able to function correctly. It's going to be too free to make errors and mistakes. I say it again, I mostly support them, but if there's no good opposition there, to be there when I think they shouldn't be supported, when I think, hold on a second, now this party that I'm maybe involved in is making mistakes, if there's no one going in with me to say, alright, we need to look at this again, and they're just free to do it on their own, because everyone's quit politics essentially, because they tried with JC, and politics ate him. It ate him. He's been in it for 40 years or whatever. He was doing the stuff. See, this is what I think they hated about him. I think they hated that they couldn't copy what he'd done because he was so early into it. Because he was doing it before anybody else was doing it. You could never have any ambiguity over who was the real authority when it came to these current moral attitudes that we seem to have in society about things like race. Because he was the one who really was doing it back then. I'm happy to have the discussion with anyone. I'm not sure I wholly agree with everything that JC says, or that everything he's ever stood for, but the truth was he was one of the first ones to do it. He was one of the first ones to stand in those places, and he's still, or at least he was, still involved now. So he had head and shoulders above everybody a level of authority that they couldn't replicate or contest. And I suspect that's why there's always been a motivation to get him out. Because, if everybody sort of started at the same time, like, we all started doing the same behaviour at the same time, so the relative hierarchy of who's better or who's not will have to be decided through some other maneuver, something more ambiguous that we can sort of decide between ourselves, or it'd be an open competition in some way. That's fine. I see why they would all want that situation. It gives them all a bit more of a level playing field. But they could never do that while he was there, because he was genuinely involved in all this way before they were. That gave him a clear advantage, and they hated him for it. They hated him. They hated that he'd done all that good work when he was younger. Because he threw his eggs in that basket, and they laughed at him at the time for doing it, and it ended up paying off for him, and they couldn't stand it, so they had to get rid of him. I feel sorry for the guy. I disagree with him on so many things. I disagree with him. I saw him as an existential threat to the entire country, at least from an economic perspective. If that guy got into power, I feared for what our economy would become. Rampant debt, out of control inflation. I thought, our credit rating would have gone to shit. I didn't think we stood a chance if he got in. But the fact that they absolutely just devoured him, I didn't believe. I'm in a bit in shock, alright? I didn't know this was going to happen. I kind of had an inkling that they didn't like him. And you could always see that from the beginning, that they weren't happy with the status quo once he attained any sort of popularity. But I never thought they would absolutely cannibalize the guy like they have. And he's out now. Like, he'll fight to get back in. But once he realizes that he's actually, the entire system in which he is indebted to doesn't want him, he will give up, alright? He will go write a book, do his memoirs. He'll just quit. He'll get a charity job somewhere, alright? They want to see him as a binman. That is like the current leadership's wet dream is to see Jeremy Corbyn as a bin man, just on the back of a green truck running around picking up bin bags. Because they don't want what he did to pay. They don't want that to be the route to success, because that's none of what they did. None of them did that. And I think they're awful people for wanting that for him. I think the activities they're doing, it's unfortunate, but at least now he can see. Like, how deep does the cognitive dissonance go? How deep is it that until he realizes that people can exaggerate a situation for political gain if it identifies a victim and an aggrieved class? Once you can do that, you can begin to exploit the situation for your advantage. By picking a side, by representing things differently, you can do it. I don't believe he ever saw it that way, even though he benefited off that exact dynamic. But I'm sorry it's happened to him, and I think maybe, just maybe, if he can overcome that anchoring that he has in the process and just view it a bit existentially, a slightly different perspective, just going from 2D to 3D, maybe now he'll see the paradigm for what actually is going on. But I don't know. He's long in the tooth now. I don't know if that's possible for him. But say what you want. Make your comparisons. It's easily done. The fact that he is now sitting there with the repercussions of it and going, well, hold on, maybe things really aren't that bad. They're just being overstated, and people are using that as leverage to move things and to make change that benefits them, without it necessarily being fully vindicated or warranted. And maybe that change actually is worse overall for everyone, but only actually made it better for a very few, but a very vocal few. We'll see. We'll see how it works out for him. JC, I'm sorry it's happened, bro. You were a fool, but you were an honest fool. You were an honest fool. That made you the best of them, to be honest with you. I'd buy you a pint, mate. Alright, see you around.